I am Pramod Kumar Srivastava. My lecture is on business research method. In business research method, today I am going to deliver on this topic. The content is problem in research, role of research in decision making, factor that affect the managerial decision and research process. So after going through this lecture, you can understand the problem in research, able to explain the research in decision making and explain the whole research process. So we started with the problem in research. When we are doing the research activity from initially to the end of the whole activity, we go through lots of problems. Sometimes we have to struggle with a certain problem, and that are the problem we are going to discuss. First is not similar to science. We can say that the research is or in research we are doing the scientific method, or scientifically we are doing everything, but in a completely we cannot say that it is a science, or we can say that it is not a physical science. Uncontrollable variables, human tendencies, time and money, lack of computerization and lack of scientific training in the methodology of the research. These are the problems in the research. So first we start with not similar to science. A research problem is a gap in an existing knowledge. What is the knowledge we are finding, and that existing knowledge there are so many gaps. A contradiction in a established theory, or a real world challenges that researchers aim to address in their research. It is the heart of any scientific inquiry directing the trajectory of the investigation. So we can say that simply in a research we have to find the gap on the existing knowledge, existing situation, existing phenomenon. Second is that uncontrollable variable. There are so many variables in during the research we cannot control, of even we try to control, but it is not possible to control uncontrollable variable. That is the reason that variable is considered as an or known as an the uncontrolled variable. An uncontrolled variable or the mitigated variable is the variable in an experiment that has the potential to negate a impact of the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. So these uncontrolled variables have a negatively impact on dependent as well as independent variable, and that is the reason they are influencing the research activity. Sometimes they can deteriorate the findings of the research. This can cause false correlation, improper analysis of the result, and incorrect rejection of the null hypothesis. So due to uncontrollable variable, there are so many things happen in the research. First is the false correlation, improper analysis of the result, and incorrect rejection of the null hypothesis. Second thing is that third is the human tendency. Human tendency or the research problem is a specific issue or the gap in a existing knowledge that you aim to address in your research. You may choose look for a practical problem aimed at continuing to change, or the theoretical problem aimed at expanding the knowledge, and some research will do both of the problem focus on one on the other hand. So these are the human tendencies. Third is in the time. Fourth is in the time and money. During the research process, there are so many time and money involvement, and sometimes we have a crisis for the time as well as the money, and that the situation researcher sometimes want to manage that situation or sometimes manipulate the situation, and that become a problem in the research. Like the the time and money, there are lack of computerization in the research also. During the research process or before the uh, collection of the data, there are so many problem, and that problem is related with the computerization of the data in proper manner. And during the research also there is a problem of computerization of the data in proper manner. So during the research we can understand that before and after, the computerization of the data is also one of the lacking in the research. And the next is the lack of scientific training in the methodology of the research. Whatever the methodology we are using in the research, or the researcher using that kind of the methodology, sometimes that methodology is considered as the bias basis methodology, sometimes the lack of knowledge of the researcher, and sometimes the selection of the methodology also due to the biasness and the malpractices of the researcher. So therefore, in the addition to the developing of the research and the methodological skill, the research method training course should enhance all other aspects of the scientific thinking, understanding, evidence-based reasoning skills, and the contextual understanding. So these are the situation overcome by the proper training to the researcher, and by this way we can try to eliminate or try to reduce the problems in the research. And as well as we can able to reduce the problem in research, that means we are going to increase the quality of the research and the output of the research in a better manner, in a better aspect, and that can also be used for the decision making in a better way. Next is insufficient interaction between university research department and the business establishment. There is a problem in our country also, and that is the problem related with the developing and developed country, that there is a lack of consortium between the industry, government, and academia, and that is the reason that it is very tough to coordinate between the industry, what industry actually like, or what industry actually require, and what actually the want to deliver by the academia, and what actually academia is delivering the thing. So if there is and the interaction in a better way, or the very smooth way, we can eliminate these things, but it is not happening in a better way in developing country and developed country. So these are the characteristics of the developing and developed country, that insufficient interaction between the academics and the industry. Next is the lack of confidence on the part of the business unit to given the information. Whatever the information we are taking from the business unit, sometimes they give the information on bias basis, sometimes they want to hide the information related with their organization. Like the example that NPA is one of the critical things for the banking here, and most of time banking organization want to hide their NPA. So these are the problem considered as in the confidence level of the business, and if the business is not giving a better confidence to the academics, and that is the reason academy is not able to solve the problem of the business. Next is the lack of code of conduct. Code of conduct is one of the important part when we are doing the research activity. If we are not going through better manner of the code and conduct, that means we are not delivering better quality of the research. But this is also one of the characteristics considered in the developing, when the people doing the research in developing country or underdeveloped country, where the country position is very good and country considered in the developed country, they are giving very good focus or very good emphasis on the code of conduct. But this one is not doing well in a developing country as well as developed country. Next is the difficulties of adequate and timely sectorial assistance. Whatever the sectorial assistant required for the researcher or whole research process, sometimes we are not getting on a very adequate basis, and sometimes we are getting, but the time frame is not as per the requirement, because sometimes we want to complete this research activity within the July of this month, but because of the supply of the information from by the different department and their sectorial practices or the sectorial assistant, and they are not able to give a proper information on a proper time frame. So these are the difficulties of the adequacy and the timely sectorial assistance by the different department and the need of researcher. What actually researcher want to do by that information. Next is poor library management and functioning. This is also one of the problem that most of time when we are doing the research, and for the research whatever the information or whatever the text or whatever the literature we want to gather for the help of our research or for the better research, and that is sometime, or we can say that mostly library is not sufficiently supporting us for this regard. So poor library management and the functioning is also one of the lacking when we are in the research activity. For the philosopher or the for the thinker, research means that the outlet for the new idea and new insight. But our academic system not giving the proper space for the creativity, and that is the reason the thinking process is not in a better manner, and that is the reason for the new idea, new insights are not coming in a very proper manner. Or for difficulties of the timely availability of the published data, whatever the data we require, the data is not available on timely basis, and that is the reason also we are not inputting that data during our analysis, and that is the reason the quality of the analysis is not as much as good what we require, or what beneficiary require, or what other stakeholders require. Ignorance, ignorance by the different authorities, ignorance by the academic department, ignorance by the researcher, ignorance by the support assistance agency, ignorance by the sectorial practices. So there are a lot of ignorance, and every aspect there are the ignorance, and that ignorance lead to create a deficiency in the research, and that the reason we are not able to do a better quality research. Next, researcher for the sake of the research limited practical utility, through they may use high sounding business jargons. This is also one of the important factor, and that is the reason we are not doing a better research these days. And the decision makers. Next is the role of research in decision making. When we are doing the research, every research basic purpose for how we can use that research for the development of society, for the development of the welfare government, or for the development of better idea, for the development of better input to the different possibilities. So role of research in decision making is very high priority. Decision making is the process of selecting the best alternative from the available set of alternatives. So when we are in the process of decision making, we are going through a lot of alternatives, lot of choice, but which choice is better and which choice is excellent or which choice is really relevant, this all depend upon, or this all information catered by doing a better research, and from better input of the research we can able to choose a best alternative from a given alternative. Second is managing management of chiefly concerned with the decision making and its implementation. Whatever the decision we need and whatever decision we want to do, that all depend upon whatever the input we are getting from the research, and through input we that implement that input during the decision making process, and by this way we can gather a better decision. These decisions should be based on appropriate studies, evaluation, and the observation. So, whatever the decision we are deciding for the betterment of the things, or the betterment of the aspect, whatever the aspect we are taking, or whatever the objective we are taking, and that all depend upon whatever the studies we are getting, whatever the evaluation we are getting from the studying, and whatever the observation we are getting from it. Also, research provide us with the knowledge and skill related to solve the problem and to meet the challenges of a fast-paced decision-making environment. So this day the environment is changing very drastically and very dynamically and very high speed. And this day, due to these regions, we require a very authentic information and very skillful things. By this way, we are able to meet the challenges, whatever the challenges required by the different aspects of the society. Either that is challenges required by the well governance, challenges required by the better facilitation of your customer by the business organization, or the better facilitation of the infrastructure, better facilitation of the health and education of the society. So there are so many challenges, and the challenges is very dynamically changing, and their change speed is very high and very high with high frequency. So these days the requirement of the good research is increasing high and high, because of the environment of the decision making process is become more faster as compared to the last decade, or the last 2 or 3 decades. According to Herbert Simon, our decision making involves three activities. So when we are going for the decision making process, we go through these three activities. First, intelligence activity. So in this activity, we go through the scanning the environment for identifying the condition necessary for the decision making. So first activity is that we go through the scanning of the environment and identify what are the conditions necessary for the decision making. Second, designing that activity, intelligence activity. After that, we are designing the activity. In designing the activity, first step is identifying, developing is the second point, and analysis is the third point. The alternative course of action. Whatever the alternative course of action, first we have to identify all course of action, then analyze all course of action, and on that basis what we have to find out which alternative is the best alternative or which alternative is the worst alternative, and on that basis we go for the particular alternative as per the objective, as per the situation, or as per the time demand. Third is the choice activity, choosing the best course of action from among the alternatives. So finally, we have to choose from them our best alternatives, and on that basis, we reach at the level of the decision making, and we can say that our level of the decision making is the excellent, because we go through a better situation. First, intelligence activity, second, designing activity, and third is the choose that activity. Next is the internal factors. So internal factor present inside an organization, such as the resources, technology, trade unions, cash flow, or the manpower. These are all factor considered as the internal factor. So how internal factor affect in our decision making process? So these are the factors affecting our decision making process. What kind of research we have, what kind of technology we have. Sometimes trade union is good for the industry, but most of time trade union is a bad for the industry. Like in the example that one time Kolkata considered as in the uh, best destination for the industry, but because of the trade union activities and the strengthening of the trade union activity, Kolkata become a worse place to start industry, and mostly industry shifting from that place because of the trade union factors. So internal factor is also one of the important influencing factor, and that always actively introducing these factors in a very close manner sometimes, and sometimes it supporting activity in a very better manner. And like internal factor, external factor is also one of the factor that present the outside organizations such as government policies, political factors, social economical factor, and legal framework, geographical and the cultural factor, etc. So these are considered as in the external factor that externally affecting our organizational decision making process, organizational productivity, and for this we are also doing the research activity how we can control some factor and what are the factor we can control and what are the other factors we are not able to control. So which factor we can control, we go through that for by our decision making, and what are the factor we are not able to control, we have to just left that factor and go for the solution how we can do better business or better activity without controlling uncontrollable factors. So again, I am repeating such factor: government policies, political factor, social economy factor, legal factor, geographical factor, cultural factor. Internationally, sometimes the factor is also influencing the activity or influencing your decision making process. Another type of factor is quantitative factors. So quantitative factors means simply quantitative means that we can measure, such as the time, resource, cost factor are considered as the quantitative factors, and that also impacting our decision making process. Next type of factor is qualitative factors. That factors cannot be measured in a quantitative term such as the organizational cohesion, sense of belongingness of the employee, loyalty, risk of technological changes, human behavioral changes. So these are the factors considered under the qualitative factor that also influencing our decision making process. And the next one is the uncertainty factor which cannot be predicted, because when we are doing research activity there are so many factors, that factor also considered in the variables. Some variables is a control variable, some variable is uncontrolled variable, and some variable is uncertainty variable. We cannot predict that variables, and that variable is majorly impacting our decision making process. Next slide is related with the research process. So when we are going to research process, we go for at least 10 steps in research process. First, the problem formulation. Second is the literature survey. Third is the development of hypothesis. Fourth is the research design. Fifth is the choice of sample design. Sixth is the data collection. Seventh is analysis and interpretation of that data. And eight is hypothesis testing. Ninth is the interpretation of the result. And last is the report writing. So first we go through what actually is the research process. The research is a search of the knowledge, or we can say that the research again and again searching for the knowledge, that is called research. It helps in taking appropriate decision. Research involves asking a question and then trying to find an answer to it. Research is essentially a systematic, scientific, and structural inquiry seeking factor through objective method. Therefore, a research must have a clear defined set of step by step process. So we can say that research is a step by step process. Our knowledge of the research process is essentially both in those who conduct the research and for those who wish to benefited by the research. So simply we can say that the research is also important for the researcher as well as for whom we are doing the research. Meaningful knowledge should have a definite purpose and direction. So whatever the knowledge we are gathered from the research that have a definite purpose and the direction. In developing research process, one would like to list the sequence of step-by-step activity in a research process. These steps are interdependent and may overlap each other. So we can go through the research process that every process in the research is interdependent and they are overlapping on each other. They may not follow a strict sequence and the researcher has to be vigilant of these orders continuously throughout the research process. If the researcher is not vigilant continuously throughout the research process, there might be the blunders in the research. However, one can broadly enlist the main steps involved in the research process as the procedural guidelines of the research, and that research process is already given to your screen that we have at least go through these 10 steps of this research process. Next is the flow chart of this process. So that research process is started with the defining the research problem, then review of the literature, then formulating the hypothesis, then designing research, then collecting the data, then analysis the data and testing the hypothesis, and then interpreting and reporting this. So these are the steps, and during these steps there are two things or two. One is the F and second one is the FF. F stands for feedback and FF stands for feed forward. So feedback related with whatever the activity we are doing through the whole research process, and whatever the mistakes we are doing in the whole research process, we have to understand that mistake, acknowledge that mistake, and try to rectify that mistakes. That is the part of feedback process. And second one is the feed forward process. Feed forward process is the process whatever the activity we are not doing in present time, but we are going for enough future aspects. Sometimes we go through the thing are going in a same manner, but thing is not going in a better manner because we are not doing the thing in a different way. So in feed forward process, we have to do the same thing in a different manner. So that is also known as the feed forward process. So when we are doing this research process, we have to go through the feed forward process as well as feedback process. The above the research process, we go through this flow chart, and the first step is that the problem formulation. So in problem formulation, how we can go through to solve the problem. That problem formulation is started with the definition of that research process. So what is a research problem? So first we go through the formulation of the problem is the first and the foremost step in the research process. So simply we can say that the first step of the research is to identify the problem. It is not always easy to identify and define a problem in an ever changing business environment. So problem formulation is a really toughest target for these days business situation. A researcher not only discover and identify a problem area but also a specific problem within that area concerning his interest in the business. The problem should be clearly and precisely stated. Whatever the problem we are finding, that would be clear and in a very precise manner. The statement of the problem must be complete statement. There is no any ambiguity, there is no unclarity. That should be clear without ambiguity and in a very precise manner. The problem in the business may sometimes be obvious and one can pinpoint them. Many a problem is not so apparent and need exploration. Thus, first of all, one has to identify a problem specifically and thoroughly, and then it has to express in a scientific term so that the statistical analysis can be performed on that problem. So, whatever the information or whatever the problem we are selecting, first it is very precise manner, second it is in a very clear way, and third that problem statement is a complete statement, and the fourth is that there should be a space in a scientific methodology or expressed in a scientific term. If they are not expressed in scientific term, we are not able to analyze in a scientific manner. So these are the part of the problem formulation. So one of the important and critical point in our initial stage of the research is that the problem, and we have to understand that meaning of the problem, the question or the whatever the issues related with the research. Research problem refer to sometime very difficult or the need with the researcher experience in context of either the theoretical or practical situation and want to put obtain a solution for them. So whatever the problem we are going to find out, the basic objective that problem we have to solve during our research process, and this is the main crux of the research, that simply we find out the problem and we solve that problem, and for find out in the problem and solution of the problem is considered as in the whole research process, and within that we already go through there are about 10 space and 10 steps, and every steps we go through one by one. So next slide is, how do we know we have a research problem? So finding the problem is critically thinking, and it's a very critical process of doing the research and gathering the problem in the research. So how we can gather that information or that problem? So we start with the first step of the customer complaints. Why customer complaining regarding your product and services, and what kind of complaint? Sometimes the complaint not related with the product quality, sometimes complaint related with the delivery, sometimes complaint related with the service quality, complaint not related with the price. So we have to first understand different types of complaint, and that complaint is coming by the feedback form when we are giving the feedback form to our customer, and from that feedback form we can gather the complaint. Also we can gather the complaint from customer care telephone lines as well as email of the customer care. Through that we all also gather the customer complaint. Second is the conversation with the company employee. Whatever the problem facing by our internal customer, that is our employee. So if we are conversating with our employee, we can gather the information related with what type of problem we are facing in our business. Third is the observation of an inappropriate behavior or condition in the form. Whatever the behavior conducted by your internal customer or whatever the behavior conducted by your external customer regarding the different aspect, that all information gathered through the observation process, whatever the inappropriate thing going on, and that appropriate thing is gathering agenda information. Deviation from the business plan. What actually we are planning and what actually we are getting as in the result or what actually we are doing. That are the gaps, and we have already creating the gaps, and we if we are able to understand or acknowledge that gaps, that should be a better input for our business process and better input for gathering the problem. Success of the firm's competitors, how our competitor is doing business better than our business, and what are the points they are doing better than our business. So that also giving you the space, and that space is considered in type of the problem of the business. Relevant reading of the published material, whatever the material published related with our business, our competitor, or the internal or external environment related, whatever the regulation changes during the business process. So all these are inputs considered as in the problem formulation for the business, and the company recording and reporting what are the recording information and the what are the reports generated by the company. These are the part of the problem formulations. So first steps in the research process to identify the problem involve two activity. When we are identifying the problem, that problem involves two activity. First identification, second the selection. Sometimes we are able to identify different kind of problem, but we are not able to select which problem is considered in the priority problem, which problem is considered in the least priority problem. So identification and selection is the first step of the research process, and the second is the formulation of that problem. If we are completing the identification and selection of the problem, next step we have to formulate that problem in a scientific manner, because if we are not able to formulate that problem in a scientific manner, it is very tough for us to analyze that problem and reaching to the finding level or reaching to the conclusion level. Next is the sources. Identifying and selection is the step involved in the identification of few problems and selecting of one out of them after the evaluating the alternative against certain selection criteria. So, in a problem formulation, as well as we are able to formulate the problem, we reach to the level how we can select them, how we can evaluate them, and finally approve that problem. So next is the sources of the problem, from where we are getting the problem. So first source of problem is reading, second is the academic experience, third is daily experience, fourth is exposure to the field situation, fifth is consultation, seventh is brainstorming, eight is the research, and nine is the intuition. So these are the steps by this we can go through or we can understand the problem. So if decision maker have a capacity for reading ability, or if decision maker is very highly involved in the reading ability activities in internal literature as well as the external literature, he and also sometimes the researcher considered a good researcher because their reading ability is very good. because if their reading ability is very good, they can understand the thing. They can get input from different sources of published and sometimes the unpublished source. We can gather the information. Academic experience, how much they are academically sound, their ability or their way of doing the research is affected by their academic experience. On daily basis, what they are doing also impacting their research. Exposure to the field situation, when we are going to the field and when we are visiting the field, there are so many information gathered uh, in the field, and that all depend upon the observation ability of the researcher. If the observation a researcher is very keen to observe different activity and different inappropriate or appropriate behavior, they can find out what they are in this situation. Do people are doing appropriate behavior? On which situation people are not doing in not doing appropriate behavior? So these all depend upon key observation situation of the researcher. The consultation, sometimes we are not able to find out the information, not able to observe the information in very particular manner. In that situation, we involve certain consultant, and certain consultant have an ability to cater our demand, and by this way we are able to reach a better finding and better research level. Sometimes we are brainstorming our internal as well as external customer regarding the sources of the problem, and through the brainstorming lot of information we are gathering, and by this and this is the reason that quality circle framework is established in every organization. It's established. It's started with the manufacturing organization, but these days quality circle framework is established in academic organization, service sector also, and by this way they are able to improve their process of delivering services or process of delivering their product to their customer in every aspect related with the creative aspect as well as the manufacturing aspects, and how they are delivering their customer from manufacturing point to the end resource point. So brainstorming is also important factor for the or considered as the important factor for the source of the problem. After brainstorming a research activity, we are gathering information, lot of information by doing the research activity, and sometimes due to the intuition of the researcher or intuition of the visionary, we are gathering lot of information. So these are the sources we are gathering the information related with our problem. Next is the criteria of selection. The selection of one appropriate researchable problem out of the identified problem required evaluation of those alternative against certain criteria. So when we are in a selection process, we are gathering lot of information, lot of problem, but we are not able to do research on every aspect. So which aspect or which problem is a highly prioritized problem, that all depend upon the way of selection or way of evaluating in the different alternatives of the problem, and by this way if our way of selecting the evaluating the different alternative is very excellent, that means we are reaching the level of the excellent selection of the problem given the alternative. So that criteria started with the internal and the personal criteria. Researcher interest, internal and personal criteria started with the researcher interest. Sometimes researchers have an interest on a particular problem, and that might be the problem is not on a priority basis. Still, researcher going to select that problem because that is dependent upon the researcher's interest. So researcher interest, researcher competence. in which area researcher is highly competent. Researcher also selecting those type of alternative that related with the researcher experience, researcher ability or researcher skills. And the third one is the researcher own resources, whatever the resource researcher have available. Sometimes researcher have a very good financial resources, or sometimes they have a very long time for doing the research. They can do that kind of problem. Sometimes they have a lack of financial support, as well as the time is very shortage. At that time the condition is changes and researchers is doing alternatives for the that kind of the problem. So internal and the personal criteria depends upon the researcher interest, researcher skills, and the researcher own resources. Second is the external criteria or the factor. So external criteria come behind the researchability of the problem. What kind of problem that we are able to do research, importance and urgency, what problem have high importance and what problem have a high urgency, novelty of the problem, which problem is novel problem, which problem is not novel problem, feasibility, facilities, usefulness, societal relevance, and the researcher personals. So these are the external problems, and we all go through that external problem, and that external problem depend upon the situation, at which situation we are doing the research. So after internal and external problem, there is in the formulation of the process. So identification and formulation of the research problem. So formulation of the process is of refining the research idea into the research question and the objective. So in simple meaning of the formulation, that whatever the statement we are gathered for as in the problem statement, and now we are going to redesign that statement into the research idea or the research question and converting into the research objective. So first step of the formulation, and the second step in the formulation means the translating and transforming the selecting research problem topic idea into scientifically researchable question. So whatever the problem converted into the questions and the objective, now that question and objective converted into scientifically researchable questions, and it is concerned with the specifying exactly what the research problem is. So problem defining, the problem definition or the problem statement is a clear, precise and set a statement of the question or raise that it is to investigate with the goal of finding answer and the solution. So in a very simple manner we can say that the problem statement is very precise, very much clear, or undoubtedly there is no doubt related with that question, and we have to investigate with the goal of the finding the answer and the solution. So whatever the problem or whatever the question we are taking, that should be getting level. We can investigate that problem and reach to the finding, or we can able to give the answer of that problem. If we are not able to give the answer of that problem, that considered as in the ambiguity, and there is no meaning for that problem in the research. So whatever the problem we are selecting, that is clearly identified, that should be very precise, there is no any ambiguity, and that have a ability to solve that problem. There are two ways of starting a problem: posting questions or questions, or second is the making declaration statement and the statement. process involved in identifying the problem. So, statement of the problem is a general way. Whatever the problem statement we are adopting, it's a very general statement. Next is the understanding the nature of the problem. Which kind of nature and what kind of the nature of that problem. And the third one is the surveying the available literature. Next is that developing the idea throughout the discussion. Now, criteria of good research problem. So, when we are designing the research problem, what are the criteria? So, first, it is clear and unambiguous. Whatever the problem we are capturing, that should be very much clear and without ambiguity. That should be empirical. It have a empirical. That could be variables. That could be interesting and novel and original and ability of guidance. So these are the important points we already discussed thoroughly, and when we are going to find out the problem, we have to go through these criteria. If your problem consider this criteria, that means your problem is really genuine problem, your problem is workable problem, your problem is have findings, and you can now go for the research on that problem. So defining problem results in a clear-cut research objective. So first is the symptom detection. Second is analysis of the situation. After symptom detection, we go for how we can analyze the situation. Third is problem definition. Fourth is a statement of the research objectives, and so these are the steps when we are defining the problems. The result in a clear-cut research objective. So we started with the symptom. Second, the analysis the situation. Third, the problem definition. And fourth, the statements of the research objectives. So when we are doing research activity, the first step is the problem identification, and problem identification we go through these things. So establishing the research objective. Next slide is how we can able to establish the research objectives. So first, research objectives are the specific component of the research problem that you shall be working to answer or complete in order to answer the overall research problem given by Churchill in 2001. Second definition is the objective refers to the question to be answered through the study. These indicate what we are trying to get from the study of the expected result outcome of the study. So simply, when we are designing the research, and in designing the research we go through the problem statement, and the problem statement is matched with our objective, and objective is that relate with the outcomes and the result of the research. Next is in next slide that research objectives should be clear and achievable. Whatever the objective we are we have taken, that should be clear and achievable. We cannot take type of adjective that not be in a very clear manner and cannot be achievable. That objective is not considered in the research. Objective may be specified in the form of either a statement or the question. Whatever the objective we have taken in our research must be written in a very clear-cut statement or must be written in the question format. Generally, they are written as a statement using the words, for example, to discover or to determine, to establish. These are the format when we are drawing the objective of our research. Next is literature survey. The second step in the problem in the research process is considered as in the literature survey. So, what is literature review or the literature survey? So, we go through the literature review. After the formulation and identification of a problem, the next important step is the review of the literature survey or literature review. An exhaustive and the critical review of the professional literature familiarizes the researcher with the current state of the knowledge. It helps in understanding of the problem and hypothesizing that others have studied. It clearly the concept, theories, major variables involved, operational definition and the research methods used in the past. This contributes to the cumulative nature of the scientific knowledge. Every year, thousands of articles, books, or the monograms are published in any field of the study. Therefore, it is important to sort out the relevant literature concerned with the field of one's interest. It is the best to begin any search for the literature with one of the guide to publish literature. These guides are increasingly computerized and including bibliography, index and abstracts. With the advent of the internet in the modern life has changed drastically, one can find one percent of the information within the four walls of one study room through internet. Some of the popular search engines like Google, Yahoo, Reddit are becoming more popular in searching for the literature on any topics. So simply literature review is the review of the information or that information or the research done in the past and that published in a different format. So on that basis, we first gather that information. But these days, it is very easy for us to gather that information because of the various search engine, and one of them is a popular search engine is Google, and Google is also providing a base of the Google Scholar. And by this Google Scholar, we can gather information sitting on our room, and that information gathered by just we have an internet connection and we have a laptop and desktop, and by this way we can gather that information, and that Google Scholar or Google Search also giving you guidance regarding related with the your interest and your topics. It is very prominent thing when we are doing the literature review activity, and that is prominently we can gather that literature review. Thank you for this session.